You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode number 67. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here, and I'm so glad to have you back. We are wrapping up summer. It is going by so fast. The school year is rapidly approaching, and our family is a little bit like a fireworks performance. You know how they always save the best for last? So we've kind of saved the best for last. And in the next week, we are going to be traveling a little bit. We're just going somewhere pretty close to us. It's a bit of a drive. So we're breaking up our drive by stopping tomorrow or leaving tomorrow. And we're going to stop over at some water slides, which I think the kids will love. They like sending me down the really scary ones and watching me. It's really great when I land at the end of it, still somewhat intact. And then after that, we're driving over to, it's a resort where we're staying. We're going to have some friends with us. And it's just a nice break, something to really celebrate the end of what's been a pretty fun summer and get ready for the school year. And today's episode, we're not talking about water slides. We are talking about success fatigue. And it's a concept I came up with yesterday when I was thinking about our podcast. And the reason I want to talk about it is because I've had the pleasure of working with a number of clients, and a number of those relationships are wrapping up. I shouldn't say a number of them are wrapping up, but I have a few clients who we are in the process of wrapping up. And what I've noticed with them is that it's kind of this, it's always bittersweet for me. I'm always so delighted to see my clients succeed, for them to get the results that they want, but also kind of sad when it's time for them to move on because I miss them. I miss you if you're listening. But it really brought home to me, and this is true of the clients that I've been working with over the past 5 years, really, is that each time I work with a client, they end on that note where they have reached a next level. And from there, they're going on to the next level. And it's kind of like when you watch a movie and there's this big story in the movie and a bit of drama, there's challenges, there's obstacles. And at the end, they get to where they want to be. And then the movie ends and you don't get to see the next installment unless, of course, there's a sequel. And in life, there always is a sequel. And the reason that I want to talk about success fatigue is that sometimes there's this really clear transition. And what I want to focus on is that point where you reach that level of success and what happens next, right? And so you can think about what kind of milestones you might be reaching in your career. I can tell you some of the milestones that my clients reach are getting a new job, for example. If it's a transition where the client is looking to move out of one position and into another, there's a very clear demarcation between where they were, right, and where they're going. And typically there's an end date to job A and a transition or entry point date into job B. So that's a very clear example. And it's easy to see, okay, I've finished up here and I'm moving on there. Sometimes it's a little bit more opaque. Maybe it's a decision that somebody has made about what they want to do in their career. And that decision itself is going to be the spark. It's the starting point for a process. So it may not be that the process is as clear to the outside world. It may be clear to them, but that decision making sometimes can be really difficult in itself. Sometimes it is more related to your practice. So this is where I have clients who come in and they're struggling with procrastination. They're struggling with motivation, with perfectionism, struggling with time management, creating systems, delegating. And so that again is a process where there's a lot of work that goes into taking their practice and managing it and creating a practice that they love to be in. And what happens there is that even though there may not be this clear date, right? It's not like the way that you would end a job on a particular date. You are transitioning. and you do put a lot of work into achieving a particular goal, and then you move forward. And what happens then is that you are left with a practice. Now your practice works. And then you see, okay, now that I've done all this tidying up, I realize that there's this other piece of my practice that I haven't really been paying attention to. Maybe it's the long-term vision plan. Maybe it's, okay, I thought maybe it was that my practice was out of order, but in fact, it's the practice area that I'm in. I want to make a change here. So what I'm trying to get at here is that wherever you are right now and wherever you may end up in your career, there are these transition points. And what I'd really like us to focus on today is how you manage your success. And I think there's a few reasons why it's important, but one of them is that success is relative and it is ongoing. So whenever you reach a new milestone, there will be a next milestone. And so if you're hinging your happiness on the attainment of a certain goal, you may be happy for a moment while you're there in the initial excitement of reaching that goal, but you'll set a new goal. And if your happiness depends on that goal being achieved, then there's a pretty long stretch between goals that you may not find yourself happy. And that, of course, is a concept that comes from Sean Achor. I've talked about it in earlier podcasts, I think episode number 3 in particular, where I talk about how to find the joy in your work. Another reason that it's important is that a lot of us have strategies for what we're going to do when something goes wrong, right? We've got a plan for failure. If it fails, we're not going to beat ourselves up. We're just going to pick up the pieces. We're going to learn from that. But how many of you have a strategy that you're going to follow when you are successful at something? And today's episode is really about establishing that. Because chances are, and I know this is true for you, chances are you're achieving success. Day after day, you're building on your success, and have you got a plan in place so that you can build those successes one on top of the other, build up excellence without exhausting yourself, without burning out. That's what we're focusing on here today. So the question is, how do you develop a relationship with success so that your success is sustainable instead of feeling graspy or exhausting or destined for burnout? And we're going to do that today by talking about success fatigue. First, we're going to talk about what it is. We're going to talk about why it matters. And then I'm going to offer some ideas for what you can do to manage it so that you can create sustainable, lasting success without burning yourself out. So number 1 is, what is success fatigue? And we can really look at that by putting those two words together. And success, I looked it up online, the Oxford version of the dictionary available online offered up as a definition, the accomplishment of an aim or purpose. And I think that's a really neat and tidy way of looking at success, right? You've achieved what you've sought out to achieve. And I would invite each of you to think about what success looks like to you, because I can guarantee it's going to look different for you than it will for your colleagues, your bosses, your friends. And I have a whole podcast episode. It's episode number 12. And it's about defining for yourself what is wildly successful. And if you haven't listened to it, I would encourage you to go check it out, because it invites you to think about what that looks like for you. And when you have a clear idea of what success looks like, it's a lot easier for you to attain it. Now, the second part of the definition, of course, relates to fatigue. And fatigue is defined in 2 ways. And I think both of these are really apt for what we're talking about today. Number 1, extreme tiredness resulting from mental or physical exertion or illness. So we're familiar with that, right? That idea of being tired after exertion. And the second part of it, and I love this, is weakness caused by repeated variations of stress. So what I love from this is when you take your success fatigue concept, then you've achieved your goal and you're tired and you're weakened as a result of the efforts that you've exerted in attaining that goal. So when you put that into context, taking a step back, let's say you've just reached a goal. Maybe that goal was to get a new job. Maybe it's really obvious, something like that. Or maybe your goal was to complete your first trial. Maybe your goal was to find a new client. Maybe your goal was to solicit work from a particular group, lawyer, department at your organization. There are lots of ways you may have defined success. And you get there and you imagine that you're going to feel happy, proud, excited. And instead, you feel exhausted and weak. And this may be obvious because, as I mentioned, it's a goal that is one that you would expect to feel that way. But when your success is smaller, maybe it's the day-to-day, maybe we're talking about a practice transformation, and that's really a collection of small wins, it may not seem obvious to you that that is actually what is happening. And yet, it's like a muscle, right? If you were to go to the gym and lift a bunch of heavy weights, you would not expect yourself to be able the next day or in that same day to be able to go ahead and lift equally heavy weights or even heavier weights. You would need to give yourself a rest, a break before you went on to do that. And it's the same thing here. So what can happen is you achieve that goal, you achieve that win, and of course you are tired. You're feeling a little bit weakened. And what can happen here is you may not give yourself credit for what you've accomplished. And that can be a little bit slippery because you may find yourself in this chaser mindset, feeling like you're always on the other side of success. So let's say you get to goal A and you immediately set goal B without ever really enjoying that moment of being proud of accomplishing goal A, right? Proud, successful, accomplished, because if you don't feel that success, you look at success as being that thing that is over there, right? It's like, no. I may have success A, but I kind of expected that, or it's not really a big deal. Success number B, right? That's really what I'm after. And it's on the other side of a wall. And so you might start to feel like you never really get to that point where you can feel truly successful. And you may not truly appreciate what you've just done. If you jump right into that next goal, you may further deplete yourself. You're already tired because you've exerted yourself physically, mentally, emotionally. And now you're trying to go and do it all over again without giving yourself that break period. And if you don't give yourself that break, if you look at a sports analogy, that's when you get injured and you don't perform as well. And in your professional work, it may lead you to burnout, right? You may feel exhausted. Your health may be suffering. You may find that you're not managing your stress very well. You're not thinking clearly. And you may feel like you have attrition in your relationships inside of work, outside of work, and other areas of your life. It may also be that you start to resort to self-sabotage, right? At every new level that you reach, you are going to evolve professionally and personally, and that requires growth. And we all know that growth can be really uncomfortable, right? There are growing pains that come along with advancing. It's building new skill sets. It's strengthening those muscles. It's needing to recalibrate to that new level of success. And if you find that you reach your goal and then dismiss it or jump right into the next one without really giving yourself that acknowledgement for having reached that first goal, you may almost feel at an unconscious level that you're punishing yourself when you get to that win. And so you may decondition yourself from wanting to achieve that success because you know that when you get there, you're going to be hard on yourself, right? You're going to reach that finish line. And instead of celebrating it, you're going to be like, well, okay, that was not a big deal. Didn't really have to work very hard, or it didn't really matter, or, I didn't do it right, or I should have done it faster, whatever it is that you tell yourself. And so you may find that you don't want to keep achieving goals or reaching for new goals because you're just not very nice to yourself when you get there. So maybe you can relate to this. Maybe you can think back to times where you've had big goals, you've worked really hard to go get them, and then you get to the goal and you're kind of like, oh yeah, no, that was okay, but really what's next? And I know I've done this myself. I imagine you may have done this at one point or maybe more than one point. And so really what we're doing here is raising awareness of it and figuring out how we can deal with this going forward. And I would like you to imagine for yourself what it would be like. What would be different for you? What would be different in your practice if you were able to use each success that you work toward and achieve as an opportunity to rest and recharge and recalibrate, and then to use that success as a building block to help you reach the next level? What would be different for you? Now, if you don't have a practice for managing your success, my guess is you're not alone. And I encourage you to think about what I offer today in relation to yourself, in relation to your practice, and really listen for what resonates with you to help you build a practice that will help you have sustainable growth. And if what I offer doesn't entirely resonate with you, I'd invite you to think about what would, right? Well, she suggested this thing that doesn't really sit with me, but I could see myself doing it this way. That's the way that I would invite you to listen to today's episode, all episodes really. And if you already have a success plan in place, you already have a strategy for how you manage your wins, then that is wonderful. And I would encourage you to think about that practice. And as you're listening to today's podcast episode, think about how you might tweak that practice, build on it so that you're even more able and even more efficient at building on your successes. So with that, my friends, we're going to jump into the suggestions that I have for you. I have a number of different ideas. I've got 5 altogether, and I hope that as you listen to these, you can listen for what resonates best with you. So starting with the first idea, it is to recognize when success happens. Now, there are, as I've indicated, different ways that success can show up. And sometimes it really is a very clear success that you will have reached, whether it's a job transition or a big achievement that you've had in your work. Maybe you're being awarded something, an honor, a distinction. Maybe you're taking on a role within your firm. You're the practice group leader. You are moving into management. Maybe you become a partner. Maybe you become a senior associate. Maybe you go from being a student to being brought on as an associate. I mean, there's all these different points in time that may be very clearly delineated as transitioning from A to B. There are also small changes. So it may be that accumulation of building your skills. Maybe you're a litigator and you're slowly building up your skills and getting more comfortable having your own trials, running more complex files, running bigger trials, bringing on a team, building your team of juniors, figuring out how to navigate relationships with really sophisticated clients. I mean, there are a number of things you might be doing. If you're a solicitor, then I imagine you may be taking on your own deals. Maybe you're working increasingly with bigger clients. The nature of transactions is becoming increasingly complex. So I would invite you to think about what's happening in your practice. And it may not be that you have a very clear milestone. I mean, you may have milestones that you've set for yourself. And if you have that, that's amazing. I think that's another reason for all of us to be planning ahead of time, right? If you have a plan for your practice, you will then know when you're achieving the milestones that you have set for yourself. But even if you're doing that, you may stop paying attention. And so what I'd invite you to do here is to honor all the small wins, all the small, and I say small really just to mean ones that you may not notice on a day-to-day, but let's acknowledge those and think about what that means for you. So think about what you've accomplished and think about how each of these wins that you've accomplished have allowed you to build up onto the next win. They really do accumulate over time. And sometimes we don't see it. And one way this might be made more clear to you is when you think about when you're in a job for a really long time. Let's say you've been there for 5 years, 6 years, and sometimes you can still identify yourself as the new kid on the block. And then you realize maybe you have a conversation with somebody who's just started and you kind of are made aware for the first time in possibly a long time of the gap in knowledge between them and you. And you realize just how much you've grown. But because it's been so gradual, because it's been day to day, you don't see it for yourself. And sometimes that becomes an impetus to move out of one organization into another. Sometimes it becomes an impetus to ask for a different role within your organization or to really solidify your presence as more of a leader than you were when you started. So really what we're doing here is we're just wanting to acknowledge the gains that you have made from one point in time to the next. And I would encourage you to do an exercise to really help you out with this one, which is to say, okay, pick a point in time. Maybe it's 6 months ago, maybe it's a year ago, and to think about where you were 6 months ago. Maybe you picked Jan 1. That's easy. And what was going on there? And what have you accomplished that was hard? Where have you had successes between then and now? And I invite you to pick a number. Make it a good, solid number. Maybe it's 20. and just start writing down. Take 5 minutes and write down 20 accomplishments you've had over the course of the year. And if you are on a roll, keep going. And then what I'd like you to do is to follow what we talked about today and really honor that success, the success that you have built, especially if these are the types of successes that you've had. If you're transitioning from job A to job B, chances are you're giving yourself a little window of time. So you will have a break built in. You may not have a break built in, but I still would encourage you to follow this process because this is how you're going to replenish yourself. It's how you're going to recharge. It's how you're going to acknowledge your wins and set yourself up for a continued practice of building your success. So once you've done that, step one, that is really just to acknowledge and recognize when your success happens, is number two, is to take a honeymoon. And I recorded a podcast at the end of the last calendar year. It's episode number 52. It's all about celebrating success. So you might listen to that if you need some ideas about how to celebrate your success. But here we're going to take a honeymoon. And what that means is you're going to rest, regroup, and recharge. And what we want to do here is we want to think about that definition of success, fatigue and weakness. So we want you to reverse the fatigue. Do what you need to do to bring yourself back to baseline, get yourself rested, get some sleep, time outside, time with friends, whatever it is you need. Give yourself a window. Maybe it's just a weekend that you have. Maybe it coincides with a holiday or you have a holiday coming up. Make that holiday count, right? Give yourself some time to really rest, to get yourself back up to, a full tank of gas. And then the second is allow yourself to regain strength. So you're rested and you're regaining strength. And what does that mean? I think the difference there between the rest and the strength is, can you give yourself that mental space so that you're now able to tackle that next challenge? The work that we do, the work that you do, so much of it is of your mind, right? It's the reasoning, it's the judgment, it's dealing with difficult, complex, challenging problems. It's the emotional regulation that comes along with managing your stress, your client's stress, all of it. And so give yourself that mental break, whatever it takes for you to recharge at that level. The other thing that you'll get by taking a honeymoon is perspective. And you probably do this when you write briefs, memos, or anything that is a significant document, is how useful it is to write and then give yourself a window. Maybe it's a day before you look at that document again, because all of a sudden you can see how the flow of that document goes. When there's a typo, it jumps out at you so much more clearly than if you've been staring at the same page for the last 5 hours. And so giving yourself that time to rest and recalibrate also gives you a fresh perspective when you step back into your office and think about what that next goal is for you. So I'd also encourage you here, if you have trouble resting, which a lot of us do, to go back. I've got a couple of recent podcast episodes, episode number 60 and episode number 64. Episode 60 is about time guilt and how to rest in a culture that really prides itself on being busy. And number 64, which is how to break up with busy once and for all. I think both of these episodes will help you if taking rest, taking that time to recalibrate is something that is challenging for you. So that's step number 2, is to take a honeymoon. So number 1, we acknowledge that success. Number 2, we take a honeymoon. Number 3 is I would invite you to look back. Look back at the path to your success and ask yourself, what do you want to bring with you? What were the things that you did on that path to success that you want to keep with you when you go to that next level of success? So it might be that you were really good at getting your focus on the goal. You may have had a very clear plan. You may have had really distinct goals. You may have had a lot of support in terms of who was helping you get there. And those may be things that you want to bring with you. I would also invite you to think about, what is it that you want to leave behind? What got you from A to B that you no longer want to bring with you for that next leg of your journey? And that might be excessive amounts of hustle. Maybe you were working way harder than you want to be working, and it was counterproductive. It depleted you. It wasn't productive in the end. Maybe you were working with toxic clients. Maybe you had a toxic boss. Maybe you have colleagues that are really difficult to work with. Maybe the project was one that you weren't fully engaged in. I'd invite you to think about, what about the circumstances of your work were ones that you don't want to repeat. What do you need to look out for going forward? I would ask yourself how you spoke to yourself. For a lot of the lawyers that I work with, the running commentary, the negative self-talk can be really detrimental, right? It may be in your mind helping you get there. You may think that by kind of pushing yourself, not being kind to yourself, putting that pressure on yourself, that you're getting results faster and better. And what I would invite you to consider is maybe they're actually slowing you down. And so negative self-talk, that internal dialogue, may be something that you want to leave behind. And I did an episode, I can't remember the number, but it's about being your own best boss. It's probably the episode where I really focus in most on that internal dialogue. So if that's something that resonates with you, I'd encourage you to go back to that and think about how you want to speak to yourself going forward. And another thing you might want to leave behind is second guessing your decisions. And this is something that I see, and I think it can really slow you down when you make a decision and then second guess that decision and keep going back and forth on that decision, because it really keeps you in that no man's land, right? It keeps you sitting on the fence. And so you're not really moving forward with the decision that you make, or moving forward with the decision that you don't make, right? If it's, do I stay or do I go? If you're on the fence, you're not really going anywhere. So that's another thing that you might want to leave behind. So think about, for you, maybe you have a success that you're thinking about right now. I mean, if you've done that exercise and you've got, your list of 20 or more, think about what it is that got you there. What are the skills, the strategies that you want to bring forward? What are the skills and strategies that you ultimately want to leave behind you? So number 4 is, what is your next goal? So once you've had that chance to rest, you've got a plan for how you want to approach that next goal, think about what that next goal is going to be for you. And if you've decided to transition into a new job, what are some of the goals you might set for yourself within that organization? What do you want your first 90 days to look like? What do you want your first 6 months to look like? What is it that you are hoping to achieve there? What kind of relationships do you want to build? What kind of work do you want to get? Get really specific about what your goals are. And maybe your goal is different from that. I mean, maybe you've just gotten a handle on your practice, right? You've finally figured out how you want to manage your time, deal with your calendar, deal with your files in a way that really aligns with you, that makes you feel good. You're in control of your practice. And that has opened up a whole new window for you to think about where you want to go with your practice. You may have just been treading water before to keep yourself afloat. And now you realize you've got capacity to do so much more. What is that for you? And so it may also be that the next stage for you is opaque, or something that you can't really even imagine right now. You don't know what your next goal is. And if that's where you are, I would invite you to welcome that as an opportunity to be as creative as you want to be. I mean, this is really kind of an exciting place to be, because you get to decide what that next goal is. And believe me, if you have any questions about how you might go about doing that, you can, of course, always reach out to me. But that may be a position that you find yourself in, right? You've reached the goal, you're where you want it to be, and now you're trying to figure out what that next goal is, and it may not be obvious to you. So we've gone through 4 steps altogether. I'm just going to read those back to you. Number 1 is to recognize when success happens. Number 2 is to take that honeymoon, take that break. Number 3 is to look at your path to success and decide what you want to continue doing and what you want to leave behind. Number 4 is to set your next goal. And number 5 is, as you proceed toward this next goal, how can you do that in a way that is most sustainable for you? And some questions that you might ask yourself are, number 1, how will you monitor your strength? So as you're working toward that goal, how are you going to monitor your strength? And that, of course, will look different if you're working on a short-term project. Maybe it's an application you're preparing for and it's something you're going to do over a few weeks. Maybe it's something bigger than that, right? Maybe it's submitting that partnership application in 6 months' time. So how will you monitor your strength as you go through that process? Number 2, how will you manage that fatigue, right? If we know that success and that exertion is going to lead to fatigue and sort of a weakness, we've talked about that strength piece, right? Taking care of your mental health, taking care of your mental capacity. How are you going to take care of that fatigue? And it's almost like the physical element of your practice. Number 3, what support do you need? So yes, you can do it alone. We all are capable, we're smart, ambitious, hardworking, but how much better will it be when you have support in place? Whether that support shows up in your home and does your laundry and your cooking and helps you with your kids, or whether that support is in the office, it's your assistant, it's a team, it's the lawyers who support you in your work. I would encourage you to think about what that looks like. Your support can also be mentors. Your support can also be coaches and counselors, people who really help you take care of you. So what support do you have in place? And another question you might ask yourself is, what are you going to do to create joy in your practice? And this really goes to this idea that your success is a continued path, right? You're going to be on your success path from A to B, then from B to C. Most of the time, you're going to be in the process. And so how do you want to create a process that brings you joy, as opposed to a process that feels hard, where you're struggling, where you're unhappy, you're punishing yourself, etc. So how do you cultivate joy in the process? And again, I've got that podcast episode, I believe it's number 3. You might find some ideas there. So when you do this, when you have a success strategy in place, you're effectively creating a formula for yourself to follow. You're creating a repeatable sequence that you can practice, a practice of goal setting and attaining those goals that is sustainable and doesn't cause you to become exhausted and ultimately burn out. The skills that you'll need to apply here are, number 1, to let go of the idea that success is something that you struggle toward or that you achieve at the expense of your health. So again, you're really going to need to look at that process of success as something that is joyful, that is sustainable, that protects you from exhaustion and burnout. Number 2, if you want excellence as your practice, and I think you do, I think all of us really strive for excellence in everything that we do, you will need to incorporate rest and joy into the process to make that process sustainable. So going back to where we started, we are a community of professionals who are committed to a practice of excellence. And you have no idea what you're going to create tomorrow, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. You may have an idea of what you want to do, but I can assure you that what you're going to create is going to be so much more. And when you continue to build step by step on your strengths and on your achievements, you will continue that path and it will become so much greater. The impact that you make will become so much bigger. And the key here is to recognize that success fatigue is something that can really slow you down. And so we are going to be proactive about noticing when we have achieved success and be proactive about resting and preparing yourself for that next growth phase. Now, there's nothing more exciting than growth, that pride of setting a goal and attaining it, having the challenges come up, they get in your way and you overcome them. You prove to other people that they were wrong about you. That sometimes is the most exciting form of success. And surprising yourself, right? When you didn't think that you were capable of doing it, and then you go and you do it. All of that. There are so many rewarding elements of that success. And again, I invite you to see yourself as successful. Don't have success be that thing on the other side of a wall. I invite you to step into it today. And as you move forward, the key is to make your growth sustainable. It is a continuous build. And I encourage you to build a relationship with success that sustains and fulfills you instead of exhausts and weakens you. And I promise you, the impact you will make will be so much greater as a result. So if you're ready to redefine your relationship with success, to find a more sustainable way to practice so that your career becomes a series of successes that build on each other without exhaustion, self-sabotage, excessive stress, and burnout, I would love to help you. Currently, I work with lawyers one-to-one, and if you're interested in learning more about how I can help you do that, I would invite you to reach out for a consultation. You can find me on email, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm here for you. And with that, I just wanted to say a big thank you for joining me here today. I wish you all so much success. I wish you a sustainable and joyful and beautiful practice. I know you're out there doing your thing, working hard, and I just want to acknowledge all of that. I want to acknowledge you. I want to acknowledge your contributions and to welcome you and support you in reaching all the goals that you set for yourself. So with that, my friends, I'm going to wish you a wonderful week. I look forward to reconnecting again next week. I'll have survived those water slides and all things holiday, and I can't wait to reconnect. So take care, everybody, and we'll talk again soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.